In the pantheon of aeronautical engineering marvels, few names resonate with the majesty of the Boeing 747, unanimously crowned the Queen of the Skies. For decades, its unmistakable silhouette, with that distinctive hump, became the global synonym for long-distance travel. It has been the vehicle of dreams, the connector of continents, and an undisputed emblem of human technological prowess. Yet, in the deepest, dustiest recesses of Boeing's corporate archives lies the specter of a parallel reality, the echo of a plan so audacious it bordered on madness, the project for a three-engine Boeing 747 that never took flight. What if the image we all have etched in our minds of the jumbo jet wasn't the only concept Boeing had for its aerial behemoth? This isn't just a simple anecdote or a forgotten conceptual design among thousands. This is one of the most intriguing and revealing chapters in the history of commercial aviation, a potential turning point that, had it materialized, could have completely redrawn the industry map. We delve into the story of a risky gamble, born in an era of transformation and crisis. In the early 1970s, just as the original four-engine model was redefining the rules of the aerial game, a group of engineers in Seattle explored a radically different vision. A 747 Trijet designed to offer superior efficiency and performance. Why did this vision, which at the time seemed so logical, never take off? The answer is a fascinating chronicle of ambition, fierce competition, engineering challenges, and a technological revolution no one saw coming. The pressure of a red-hot market. The early 1970s were an era of seismic shifts for commercial aviation. The Boeing 747 had just burst onto the scene, shattering all preconceptions about the size and capacity of a passenger plane. With its colossal volume and seemingly endless range, the 747 was democratizing transoceanic travel in an unprecedented way. However, behind the fanfare and overwhelming success of the 747's launch, a deep unease began to brew in Boeing's offices. The root of this concern was simple and universal: money. Fuel prices, already on an upward trajectory, skyrocketed catastrophically with the 1973 oil crisis, sending a shockwave through the global economy. Suddenly, airlines became obsessively cost-conscious. In this new, austere paradigm, fueling and maintaining four gigantic turbofan engines became an immense financial burden. Fuel consumption was massive, and the maintenance costs associated with four engines, rather than fewer, represented a significant economic drain. While Boeing grappled with this new economic reality, its competitors hadn't stood idly by. The aviation market was experiencing its own power dynamics. McDonnell Douglas had launched its elegant DC-10 in 1970, and Lockheed was not far behind, introducing its technologically advanced L-1011 TriStar in 1972. Both aircraft featured a characteristic that the 747 did not possess: a three-engine configuration. These Trijets were brilliantly positioned in the market, offering an attractive middle ground between four-engine giants like the 747 and smaller, shorter-range twin-engine planes. The big advantage of Trijets at that time was their almost perfect balance. They provided the engine redundancy necessary to get certification for long transoceanic flights, an absolute necessity in an era before modern ETOPS regulations. Back then, regulations were strict, requiring twin-engine aircraft to always stay within a maximum 60-minute flight time from a suitable diversion airport in case of an engine failure, which practically prohibited them from operating on the vast ocean routes that were the domain of the 747. A Trijet, being able to fly smoothly with two of its three engines, easily met the safety requirements for oceanic flights. At the same time, they consumed significantly less fuel than a four-engine aircraft. The DC-10 and L-1011 successfully demonstrated that this concept was viable and profitable, operating long-distance routes with an efficiency that their four-engine competitors couldn't match. Boeing executives observed this landscape with growing alarm. Airlines, their customers, were taking note of the economic advantages of trijets. The competitive threat was undeniable, and Boeing couldn't afford to ignore it. Thus, a bold question arose in the minds of their strategists. What if they could merge the best of both worlds? What if they could combine the monumental capacity and unparalleled prestige of the 747 with the economic efficiency of a trijet design? With this idea, preliminary studies for the 747 trijet concept began, a plan that sought to defend the king of the skies throne by adapting it to new market realities. The monumental engineering challenge: how to amputate an engine from a legend. The idea of transforming the Boeing 747 into a trijet was much more complex than simply removing an engine and adjusting the others. It was a titanic re-engineering task that required a fundamental rethinking of the aircraft's very architecture. Unlike the DC-10 and L-1011, which had been conceived and designed from their inception as trijets, the 747 was born and perfected with a four-engine symmetry. Adapting it to a three-engine configuration implied monumental challenges. The most visible and structurally complex change was, of course, the addition of a tail-mounted engine. Anyone who has observed a DC-10 or a TriStar will have noticed how their third engine is elegantly integrated into the base of the vertical stabilizer, fed by a distinctive S-shaped air duct running through the rear of the fuselage. This design was crucial to maintain the aircraft's balance and ensure adequate ground clearance for the engine. The 747 trijet would have required a similar configuration, but on a much larger scale. Boeing engineers faced the overwhelming task of massively reinforcing the entire tail section of the 747. This structure would have to support not only the weight of an enormous high-bypass turbofan, but also the incredible thrust forces it would generate. The fuselage would have to be perforated to install an S-duct of a significantly larger diameter than its competitors, designed to feed a much larger and more powerful engine. But the challenges didn't end there. The loss of two wing-mounted engines and the addition of one in the tail drastically altered the aircraft's weight distribution and balance. The two remaining wing-mounted engines would have to be carefully repositioned along the wingspan. Their new location would be absolutely crucial to maintain proper stability, balance, and aerodynamic control. Perhaps the most critical and delicate aspect of the entire redesign was the management of the center of gravity. The flight and handling characteristics of the standard 747 were perfectly tuned and balanced for its four-engine configuration. Adding such considerable weight to the tail end would drastically shift the aircraft's center of gravity rearward. A rearward center of gravity can make an aircraft unstable and difficult to control. To counteract this, very significant modifications to the tail control surfaces, such as the elevators and rudder, and possibly even redesigns of the wing itself, would have been required to restore the lost balance. Finally, there was the complication of engine selection. The high-bypass turbofans that powered the original 747, like the Pratt & Whitney JT9D, were optimized to work in a team of four. It was unclear if three of these engines would provide sufficient thrust for such a massive airframe, especially under demanding takeoff conditions or in the event of an in-flight engine failure. Entirely new, more powerful engines would most likely be needed, adding another layer of complexity, development costs, and risk to an already ambitious project. Despite this mountain of challenges, Boeing's preliminary studies yielded a surprising result. The concept was technically feasible. Engineering projections estimated that the 747 trijet could retain approximately 90% of its four-engine siblings' passenger capacity. In return, it would offer significant improvements in fuel efficiency, with potential savings of up to 15% on long-haul routes. For airlines operating on razor-thin profit margins, savings of that magnitude could be transformative. The key question for Boeing was whether this promise of efficiency was enough to justify the colossal investment needed to develop an entirely new variant of its most iconic aircraft. A rapidly closing window of opportunity. as Boeing weighed the pros and cons of launching the 747 Trijet program. The commercial aviation chessboard continued to evolve at a dizzying pace. The DC-10 and L-1011 were no longer newcomers. They were firmly establishing themselves as the aircraft of choice for many high-capacity, long-haul routes. Premier airlines like American, United, Delta, and British Airways were actively incorporating these trijets into their fleets. They were using them on premium routes previously dominated by four-engine giants such as the 747 itself or the older Boeing 717. The reason was simple. These trijets offered considerably lower operating costs without significantly sacrificing range or payload capacity. They were the perfect solution for routes that didn't require the enormous capacity of a 747-100 or -200. Boeing found itself in a complicated strategic position. Its original 747 remained the undisputed king of the world's highest density routes, but the company lacked a competitive product in the emerging middle market, which demanded more efficient long-haul aircraft with slightly lower capacity. The 747 Trijet seemed, on paper, the perfect answer to this dilemma. However, in the aerospace industry, timing is everything. By the time Boeing began seriously considering the development of the Trijet concept in the mid-1970s, both the DC-10 and L-1011 had already secured a very significant market share. The world's major airlines had already committed to one of these two platforms. This meant they had already invested millions of dollars in purchasing aircraft, building spare parts inventories, training flight and ground crews, and adapting their maintenance infrastructure to service these models. This factor created a formidable barrier to entry for Boeing's new concept. An airline already operating a fleet of DC-10s, for example, would face enormous transition costs if it decided to introduce a 747 Trijet. It would have to train its pilots and mechanics on a new aircraft type, acquire a new parts inventory, and adapt its operations. To justify such a costly switch, the 747 Trijet would have to offer not just incremental improvements, but a revolutionary advantage. And while the concept promised greater efficiency than its four-engine sibling, it was not entirely clear if these improvements would be drastic enough to convince airlines to abandon the platforms to which they had already committed. The window of opportunity for Boeing's big Trijet was closing faster than anyone anticipated. The silent revolution, the unstoppable rise of the twin-engine aircraft. Just as Boeing was deep in feasibility analysis for its audacious 747 Trijet, a technological revolution was quietly brewing, a transformation that would forever change the face of the aviation industry. In the mid-1970s, engine manufacturers like General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, and Rolls-Royce were making spectacular advancements in engine reliability and power. The new high-bypass turbofans were becoming orders of magnitude more reliable than their predecessors. The mean time between engine failures was improving so dramatically that it began to fundamentally shift the perception of twin-engine aircraft safety. These advancements did not go unnoticed by air regulators worldwide, who began to reconsider the strict restrictions that had long limited twin-engine operations over vast expanses of water. By the late 1970s, discussions began that would eventually culminate in the creation of the ETOPS, Extended Range Twin-Engine Operational Performance Standards Program, with its formal rules established in 1985. This regulatory change was a true cataclysm for the industry. It allowed twin-engine aircraft, provided they met stringent reliability requirements, to operate on routes increasingly far from diversion airports. Slowly, transatlantic routes, historically the domain of 3- and 4-engine aircraft, opened up to twin-engine jets. Boeing, demonstrating exceptional strategic foresight, recognized this trend at a very early stage and made a decision that would define its future. Instead of investing billions in developing the 747 Trijet, a concept based on a philosophy that would soon become obsolete, the company decided to bet all its innovation capital on a new generation of twin-engine wide-body aircraft. This decision materialized in the development of the Boeing 767, which was officially launched in 1981. This gamble proved to be prophetic. By the 1980s, twin-engine aircraft like the 767 began regularly operating on routes previously unthinkable with only two engines. The reason for their success was a matter of pure economics. Two engines consume less fuel than three, have lower maintenance costs, and result in less overall aircraft weight. For airlines, the math was simple and irrefutable. If a twin-engine aircraft could fly a long-haul route safely and reliably, what was the point of operating an aircraft with a third engine? The additional engine, once an indispensable guarantee of redundancy, was now perceived as a considerable cost and increasingly difficult to justify as engine reliability reached extraordinary levels. The aviation market was shifting beneath Boeing's feet, and the company adapted masterfully. The concept of the 747 Trijet, which just a few years prior seemed like a logical and necessary evolution, was losing its relevance at lightning speed. The Trijet era, though significant, was destined to be a transitional phase in aviation history. The ghost in the archives, legacy of an abandoned idea. Boeing never issued a press release formally announcing the cancellation of the 747 Trijet program. The idea didn't die with a bang, but with a whisper. It simply faded from the design tables, overtaken by changing market dynamics and the company's strategic pivot toward twin-engine designs. By the late 1970s, Boeing was fully committed to developing the 767, an aircraft that promised even greater profitability than any Trijet, along with the added advantage of simplified maintenance with only two engines. Boeing's new strategy was clear. The original four-engine 747 would continue to dominate the planet's highest capacity routes, while the new family of efficient twin-engine jets would handle almost everything else. The market niche occupied by Trijets was shrinking to almost nothing. It is revealing that Boeing was not the only company to reach this conclusion. The Trijet era, though it left iconic aircraft, did not see the emergence of many new designs after its initial surge in the 1970s. McDonnell Douglas's attempt to revitalize the concept with a new generation Trijet, the MD-11, launched in 1990, faced serious commercial difficulties and, in many ways, marked the end of three-engine passenger aircraft development. By the 1990s, twin-engine dominance was absolute. Even the world's longest and most demanding routes were being covered by incredibly efficient twin-engine aircraft like the Boeing 777 and Airbus A330. The economic efficiency of these aircraft was simply too compelling to ignore. The 747 Trijet concept thus became the aeronautical equivalent of an evolutionary dead end. It was a fascinating branch on the tree of aviation evolution, one that ultimately could not compete with more agile and adaptable designs, but which, despite everything, left an indelible mark on history. If we allow ourselves a brief exercise in counterfactual history, what would have happened if Boeing had gone ahead with the project? In an alternative timeline, in the annals of technology, untrodden paths and alternative realities abound, inviting speculation. Every great invention has a shadow, a discarded design, or a forgotten version that, had it materialized, could have altered the course of history. Few of these what-ifs are as captivating and monumental as that of the Boeing 747 Trijet. Imagining this aircraft is not merely an exercise in fantasy. It's a deep dive into the complex interplay of engineering, economics, and strategy that defines the aerospace industry. If Boeing had taken a different path at the crossroads of the early 1970s, our skies today might look very different. Had the company fully committed to the 747 Trijet concept at that time, the history of wide-body aviation would have gained an additional, spectacular chapter. Following an intensive development period, the aviation world would have witnessed initial test flights by the mid-decade, culminating in an anticipated commercial service entry sometime between 1977 and 1978. The appearance of this aircraft would have been an event in itself. Visually, it would have been a marvel. The iconic 747 hump, a symbol of capacity and luxury, combined with the distinctive tail-mounted engine configuration characteristic of Trijets. It would have been, without a doubt, the largest and most capable Trijet ever built, a true three-engine behemoth. Its market positioning would have been as unique as its design. It wouldn't have been simply another competitor to the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 and the Lockheed L-1011 Trijet. It would have carved out its own category. With significantly greater passenger capacity than its three-engine rivals, yet more efficient than its four-engine sibling, the 747 Trijet would have become the ideal tool for a very specific and lucrative market niche. Airlines would have found a perfect solution for high-density routes that didn't consistently justify the enormous capacity of a 747 to 100 or minus 200. It's easy to predict which airlines would have been attracted to this proposal. Transatlantic aviation giants like Pan Am, TWA, and British Airways, already operating the standard 747, would have seen the Trijet as a golden opportunity. In the context of the devastating oil crisis of the 1970s, which sent operating costs soaring, the promise of an aircraft with a jumbo-jet brand and prestige, but with remarkably improved fuel efficiency, would have been almost irresistible. This aircraft could have carved out a tremendously successful market niche, solidifying Boeing's dominance in the high-capacity segment and, potentially, leading to two successful jumbo programs in parallel instead of just one. Its initial success seemed, in this scenario, almost guaranteed. However, even in this alternative timeline of success and dominance, a deeper, more fundamental question emerges. Would this colossal Trijet have been capable of altering the inexorable trajectory of the industry toward twin-engine aircraft? The answer, with the perspective history gives us, is that it's highly improbable. While the 747 Trijet enjoyed its hypothetical success, a silent but unstoppable technological revolution was already underway, a force that even such a magnificent aircraft could not have halted. The superior profitability of twin-engine aircraft, once engine technology and regulations allowed it, represented an economic force too powerful to ignore. In the late 70s and early 80s, advances in turbofan engine reliability and the subsequent introduction of ETOPS regulations, extended-range twin-engine operational performance standards, changed the game forever. These new rules freed two-engine aircraft to operate on the vast transoceanic routes that were previously the exclusive domain of aircraft with 3 or 4 engines. The economic logic driving this transition was simple and overwhelming. 2 engines will always be cheaper to operate than 3. They involve lower fuel consumption, lower maintenance costs, and lower overall aircraft weight. For airlines, immersed in a business of very narrow margins, the math was simple and irrefutable. The third engine, which in the pre-ETOPS era was an essential safety redundancy, quickly became an expensive and unnecessary luxury. Therefore, even if the 747 Trijet had been a resounding commercial success at the time, it almost certainly would have faced the same inevitable obsolescence that ultimately affected the DC-10, the L-1011, and even its successor, the MD-11. Its reign, though glorious, would have been ephemeral. Thus, the 747 Trijet never took flight, but its ghost continues to haunt aviation history as one of its most intriguing and revealing what-ifs. It represents that brief and fascinating moment in time, a window of opportunity where the future of long-haul travel seemed to belong to 3-engine aircraft, an elegant compromise between the redundancy of 4 and the efficiency of 2. Boeing's decision to abandon this concept and, instead, bet on the development of a new generation of twin-engine aircraft like the 767 and, later, the 777, proved to be one of the most prophetic and successful decisions in the history of commercial aviation. The company not only reacted to a market change, it anticipated and led it. Today's air landscape is a testament to that vision. Today, the long-haul flight market is overwhelmingly dominated by highly efficient twin-engine aircraft. while the majestic four-engine 747, the original queen of the skies, has been largely relegated to cargo operations, a noble end to a legendary career. The story of the 747 Trijet, the path not taken, serves as a powerful reminder that at the intersection of technology and commerce, progress is defined not only by the ideas that succeed, but also by the wisdom to recognize which ones should forever remain a fascinating ghost in the archives. The 747 Trijet's ultimate legacy is a lesson about the nature of innovation. It reminds us that progress is built not only on the ideas that succeed, but also on the audacity to explore alternatives and the wisdom to adapt to changing realities. The history of aviation is, in essence, a relentless pursuit of greater efficiency and innovation. Some ideas, like the 747 Trijet, remain grounded, but all, without exception, contribute to the continuous and fascinating evolution of how humanity conquers the skies.